Emotions, chapter 10 could be fun. Let's see how it works. Could be fun. Universal emotions. Ekman, Sorensen, and Friesen in 1969 proposed that there is a set of basic emotions that are universally recognized around the world. And if you recognize that emotion, it's anger, that's happy, that's sad, that's fear, that's surprise, that's disgust. That one, maybe it's universal, maybe it's not. It's contempt. The question as to whether it is universal or not. That one is shame. Is it universal? Is it not? That one is embarrassment. Universal? I don't know. Interest. And actually, there's a reason why that isn't interest. If she were really interested, then her pupils would be dilated. They're not very dilated. That's pride. Though happiness has many different words, the expression for happiness does not vary globally. When shown posed facial expressions, each culture is best at identifying expressions from their own culture. Meta-analysis of cross-cultural studies on facial expressions, people were about 9% more accurate at identifying people from their own culture. Adams and colleagues in 2010 had participants guess what emotions were being displayed by just showing them pictures of eyes. The participants were better at identifying emotions of people from their own culture. They also noted that they showed more activity in their amygdala when they were shown eyes from people from their own culture who were demonstrating fear. The differences in facial expressions of emotions across cultures are distinct enough that people can reliably guess the nationality of targets who are expressing emotions, even though the targets are of fairly similar cultural backgrounds. An American can guess better than chance whether a target is from the United States or Australia. This is Michelle Ginnicke. She's a hurdler obviously from Australia, because she is wearing an Australian outfit. I'm going to show you 4 pictures of individuals. 2 of the individuals are from Wisconsin. One of the individuals is from Australia, and the other one is from Show Low, as interesting as that is. And you have to guess which one is from Australia, which one is from Show Low, and which 2 are from Wisconsin. So there you go. They are soccer players from Viterbo University. The Australian and the girl from Show Low, the woman from Show Low, were my students back at Ashford University. And when the Ashford University closed in 2016, they transferred to Viterbo to play soccer. There's the other 2. So you need to tell me which ones are from Wisconsin, which one is from Australia, and which one is from Show Low. I'll give you another shot at the other 2. Okay. Oops, sorry. If you said this one was from Australia, you would be incorrect. She is from Wisconsin. If you said this one is from Australia, you would be correct. She is from Australia. If you said this one was from Show Low, you'd be incorrect. She's from Wisconsin. And this is the one from Show Low. As curious as that is. So there you go. Did it have to do with the eyes? Did it have to do with the expression? All the expressions are pretty much the same. Anyway, the same researchers did a study earlier comparing Japanese participants with Japanese Americans. Results were similar to those of for the Americans and the Australians. When the faces showed emotions, they were easier to read. Natural faces were much harder to read. Baron Cohen et al. In 2001 and Krauss et al. In 2010 found that people of lower socioeconomic background more accurately identified facial expressions of emotion. The lower the status, the more individuals must attend to facial expressions in order not to get into trouble. Different cultures will attend to different parts of the face to read expressions. The Japanese find emotions socially disruptive and thus are more likely to try to display a neutral face than Americans. But it is hard to control the muscles around the eyes, so the Japanese focus on the eyes to determine emotions. Research by Yuki et al. In 2007 attempted to determine where Japanese and American focus was when trying to read facial expressions. The Japanese read facial expressions from the eyes. Americans read facial expressions from the mouths. European Americans are more likely to try to read the whole face than the Japanese and are more likely to include mouths prominently in their cartoon art. Japanese cartoon art shows dominant eyes and sometimes no mouths at all, as in anime. As you can see, hardly any mouth at all. This is an American cartoon. Very prominent mouths, even in the dog. King of the Hill. You can read their mouths. They're smiling. He's neutral. He's kind of neutral. He's kind of neutral. The Simpsons, big mouths. Hello Kitty, no mouth at all. I'm not sure who that is, but oh, there's just a tiny little light. Oh. American Dad, big mouths, once again. There's a Japanese cartoon. These two people are speaking, but if they weren't speaking, you wouldn't be able to see their mouths at all. As weird as that is. This is something that the Japanese do. They put a handkerchief over their head. They tie it under their nose. It's just the oddest thing. If you watch Japanese television, actual Japanese television in Japan, you'll see this all the time, as strange as that may seem. While researchers argue that all cultures have a similar capacity to read facial expressions, cultures tend to maintain varying display rules for facial expressions. Display rules are culturally specific rules that govern which facial expressions are appropriate in a given situation and how intensely they should be exhibited. Absolutely no gut responses, gut feelings, gut checks, or anything else gut management. Some cultures encourage people to display their emotions in clear, if not exaggerated, form. In certain Arab populations, it is dishonorable if a man does not respond to an insult with a great demonstration of anger. And this is one of the reasons why we misread the Arabs so frequently, because Arabs sometimes are screaming and they're talking about attacking the United States, and we take them at face value, at what they say. But the reality is, of course, they're just doing what their culture tells them they have to do in order to maintain their leadership. The Kululi of New Guinea tend to show their emotions particularly intensely and dramatically, and that's Schiefel in 1979. It is one way that they can drive off enemies or people that they think are enemies. Among the Alaskan Native Utku, public expressions of anger are strongly condemned, and that's according to Briggs in 1970. Now, we're going to talk about the Utku again. This is a very distinctive tattoo that women wear, and you're going to see it again. The Balinese have a preference for emotional smoothness, where the emphasis is on avoiding strong display of emotional feelings for both positive and negative emotions. And for this reason, when they dance and when they do theatrics, Facial expressions are very important because normally they don't show facial expressions at all. And of course, she is showing surprise, I'm thinking. When Americans are embarrassed, they tend to make a facial expression where their face turns red, they close their eyes, and they look down. This isn't the way it is everywhere. In India, when someone is embarrassed, they literally bite their tongues, an expression that is not recognized by people in the United States. And that's what it looks like. So if somebody is embarrassed, they'll bite their tongue. Voluntarily produced facial expressions, like a wink and a false smile, suggest the existence of cultural display rules that lead people to express idiosyncratic facial expressions known as ritualized displays. And of course, we're looking at real and fake smiles. Fake smile, real smile, real smile. How do we tell the difference? It's all in the eyes. If the eyes are crinkled, then it's a real smile. If they're not crinkled, it's a fake one. The facial feedback hypothesis states that the expressions on our face reflects our true feelings. Strack et al. In 1988 sought to prove the hypothesis by forcing the face to form a frown or smile by holding a pencil in their mouths while watching a comedy. The researchers discovered that those in a smile mode found the humor in the comedy funnier. And I've actually done this experiment when I was at Ashford. I had half the students hold a pen or a pencil in their mouths with their lips, and one's holding the pencil or pen with their teeth, and then I showed them cartoons, and I asked them how funny it was at different junctures. It's really kind of an interesting experiment. Matsumoto et al. In 1988 asked American and Japanese participants about an experience where they expressed select emotions. The Americans reported feeling those emotions longer and more intensely. Mosqueda and Kurosawa in 2002 had Japanese and American students complete questionnaires indicating the emotions they were experiencing a number of times during the day. The Japanese were 3 times more likely to indicate that they had no emotions than Americans were. McCallums et al. In 2012 and Ryder et al. In 2008 found that East Asians are less attentive to their visceral states when compared with Westerners. When we talk about East Asians, we're talking about Koreans, Japanese, and Chinese. Zokoto in 2010 found that Ghanaians attend to their emotions less than Americans do. From these studies, researchers have hypothesized that masking emotions in East Asia might be leading East Asians to experience fewer and less intense emotions than Americans. Research in the West has indicated that people with hostile tendencies are at an increased risk for cardiovascular disease. The reason hostility leads to cardiovascular disease is that hostile people have more occasions when they need to inhibit their anger. In other words, they hold it in. And that isn't good. Expressing it is what you need to do. However, in cultures where anger is not expressed, people tend to experience anger less intensely. This hypothesis was tested looking at European and Chinese Canadians. Given potentially anger-induced scenarios, the Chinese Canadians found the scenarios less anger-inducing than did the European Canadians. The most common reaction by the European Canadians from the anger-provoking scenarios was to openly express their anger. For Chinese Canadians, their most common response was to reappraise the situation in a less angry way or to make efforts to distract themselves from the anger-provoking event. Now you may wonder, why in the world are there so many Chinese people in Canada? And the reason is because England controlled Hong Kong until 2000. And in 2000, the people living in Hong Kong who wanted to live in a democratic society had to move someplace. So a lot of them moved to the closest area. They moved to two places specifically. They wanted to still be under the English, so they moved to either Australia or New Zealand or Canada. Some of them actually moved to the United States, but not nearly as many as moved to Canada, so that they would still be English citizens of England. And that's why there are so many Chinese people living in Canada. The European Canadians felt much anger and tried to express it openly. The Chinese Canadians adopted strategies to minimize their anger response and thus felt less angry. So if you go to Vancouver, you'll see a lot of people that are Chinese, because that's where they went. They went to British Columbia. Anderson and Lennon in 2006 measured the blood pressures of their Canadian participants. With Chinese Canadian and European Canadian blood pressure slowly returned to baseline levels. Both of them did. Chinese Canadian blood pressure returned to normal faster than European Canadians. This is Miss World Canada. And as you can see, she is of Chinese ancestry. Chinese Canadians experienced their anger less intensely than European Canadians and were more comfortable with strategies that served to reduce their experience of anger, whereas the European Canadians suffered from psychological consequences if they did not openly express their anger. And this is one of the reasons why you need to express your anger. If you don't express your anger, you keep it inside, and this is when you start having problems. Compared with Americans, negative emotions in East Asians are associated with fewer negative health outcomes and less of a neural response when suppressing their emotions, indicating that it is not as effortful for them to suppress negative emotions. The English language has 2,000 different emotion words. English speakers are cued by their language to express their emotions and dye their hair in rainbow colors. The Chuang of Malaysia have only 8 words that describe emotion, and only 3 represents Ekman's basic emotions: anger, shame, and fear. Luganda speakers from Uganda do not make a distinction between sorrow and anger. The Gajingali Aborigines of Australia use one word, Guru Kaj, to express both shame and fear. Samoans use one word, Alofa, to express both love and pity. The Udku of Alaska do not distinguish between feelings of kindness and gratitude. And there we go, the same tattoos on her lower lip. The Ifaluk in Micronesia do not even have a word for emotion, instead lumping all internal states together. Ifaluk. Despite the fact that English is a Germanic language, there is no equivalent word in English for the German word Schadenfreude, feelings of pleasure that one gets when witnessing the hard times of someone else. Schadenfreude. And this Peanuts cartoon, and the guy that wrote Peanuts was of German extraction, and maybe that's why he said pain looks great on other people. The Javanese have a term, iklas, which refers to a somewhat pleasant feeling caused by frustration. Iklas. The Japanese ame captures the relatively pleasant feelings that one experiences when allowed to emphasize his or her dependence on one another. It often involves tendencies to behave inappropriately toward a close other as a gesture to demonstrate how secure the relationship is. And this is really very similar to codependency. So if you understand codependency, that's pretty much what ame is. But the ame has to do with An individual, let's see, how can I explain this? For the woman, or it doesn't have to be the woman, it can be either the woman or the man. One of the individual is the dominant of the two, and that individual walks all over the other individual. It's a kind of a codependency situation, but it's one that's very common in Japan. And since Japan is a male-dominated society, you normally see the men treating the women relatively poorly, but it is considered a demonstration of love that they make them walk 2 steps behind them and whatnot. And of course, that's in Japan, not in the United States. In the United States, we refer to it as codependency. In Japan, it is a sign of love. Uchida et al. In 2009 compared the emotional responses from athletes after an Olympic victory. Comparing Japanese and U.S. statements, the researchers determined that the Japanese feel especially good when they're focusing on how their emotional experiences led them to connect with others. Americans feel especially good when they're dwelling on those emotional experiences that distinguish them from others. In 2013, Oishi and colleagues examined the dictionaries for the definition of happiness in 30 countries. They found that luck was included in the definition in all but the United States, Spain, Argentina, Ecuador, India, and Kenya. And this is the symbol for luck, the cat waving at you, giving you good luck. That's one of the reasons why you see them in Asian restaurants, Chinese and Japanese restaurants. It's a symbol of good luck. People who live in countries where happiness is defined as good luck report feeling less happy than those where luck is not seen as an important part of the definition. Now, this is a bizarre part. Looking at definitions across time in the United States dictionaries, the researchers discovered that the definition of happiness included the concept of good luck until 1961. And of course, this is the birthdays. This is a star from 1961. JFK just became the president. Yuri Gagarin just flew in space. Breakfast at Tiffany's is the most popular movie. Elvis is still around making music and is the most popular artist in the United States. Subjective well-being is the feeling of how satisfied one is with one's life. The nations that score the highest on subjective well-being are Scandinavian and Nordic countries, much of Latin America, various English-speaking countries, and Western Europe. And this is, of course, Denmark. You can tell by the face paint. They're Danes. The least subjectively happy people are people of the former Soviet republics and some of the impoverished countries in Africa and South Asia. And these are of Ukrainians. You can tell from the flag that they're Ukrainians. I'm not very happy. He's trying to show off his bicep. Not much there. Sorry, dude. They did a similar study of the regions in the United States and found that the Mountain West and New England had the highest subjective well-being. The area with the lowest subjective well-being was the Southeast, and that's where a lot of the racial tensions came from. Many factors contribute to the overall satisfaction that people have with their lives. One is wealth. People who live in countries in which they have access to enough wealth to easily meet the basic needs of life tend to be considerably more satisfied than those who do not. Looking at the history of subjective well-being, once a country has an average gross domestic product of at least 40% of that of the United States, there is no longer any pronounced relation between money and subjective well-being, and that's according to Diener et al. In 1995. Diener is a German word that means helper. And when I was I was helping with autopsies, that's what they referred to the person that helps with the autopsies as Diener. You're a Diener. Money can buy a lot of happiness if you're struggling to survive. However, it has much less impact if your basic needs have been met. Those countries that promote human rights the most tend to have the happiest citizens. Those countries in which people live under the constant threat of being thrown in jail for suspicions of plotting against the government are not as happy. The overall equality among people in a country is associated with greater subjective well-being. This is somebody this is Lalesi Lalesa, from Ethiopia, who had just won a marathon, and he was showing that the people in his country are oppressed by putting his hands above his head as if he were being taken away to jail. Ethiopia. The Scandinavian and Nordic nations have various social policies to minimize differences in opportunities among its citizens. These nations have some of the happiest citizens in the world. It seems people feel good when their rights are not threatened and they have opportunities that are comparable to those of their neighbors. People in individualistic societies were far more likely than those in collectivist societies to base their life satisfaction on how many positive emotions they are experiencing. Positive emotions appear to be seen as the basis of a good life in individualistic societies. Oishi in 2002 looked at how Asian American and European Americans interpreted their past. Oishi had people record the week they were having and then asked them if they remember the week. While the two groups had similar weeks, the European Americans remembered their week as more positive than it actually was. The Asian Americans remembered their week accurately. Follow-up research by Rogers and colleagues in 2004 found that European Americans appear to be operating under an implicit theory that they should be happy. Asian Americans seem to operate under the theory that emotional experience should be balanced and consist of both positive and negative experiences. Researchers feel that it is quite possible that many of the observed cultural differences and subjective well-being are based on the different theories that people from different cultures have about how they should be feeling about their lives. In a study by Falk et al. In 2010, Canadian students were asked to choose between a video game that was fun and one that boosted thinking skills. The results indicated that European Canadians were more likely to choose the fun game, whereas Asian Canadians were more likely to choose the useful game. In the same study, students were asked to select university courses from a fictitious set of course descriptions. European Canadians were more likely to choose the courses that sounded like fun and interesting compared with the Asian Canadians, who focused more on the perceived utility of the courses. And this happened to me. I had a student from Bangladesh. When he first came to the United States, he decided that he would be a computer and mathematics major. And he was good at both computers and mathematics, but it was so boring. He took and it was my fault. He took a class in psychology. And because I was so much fun, he decided that he needed to change his major. So he changed his major. He couldn't change it directly to psychology. So he changed his major to environmental science, another serious one, but not quite as serious as computers and mathematics. Anyway, so after about a semester of environmental science, he came to me and he said, I find psychology so fascinating, I've got to major in psychology. But if I do that, I don't know if I can go home again because it's not recognized as a serious field in Bangladesh. If you go to a college in the United States, you have to be a doctor or a physicist or a scientist of some kind. He said, I can be a psychological scientist, but I'm not sure how acceptable that is to people in Bangladesh. Anyway, he eventually studied psychology, got his bachelor's degree at Ashford. And then he went on to Wright State and got his master's degree and his PhD. And now he's an IO psychologist, which is about the most scientific type of area that you can study in psychology. But he's an IO psychologist, helps people put their factories together and make all their workers happy. Anyway, kind of interesting. It was a struggle, but we got him through. Actually, he's a brilliant student, and he does very, very well. The difficult part was convincing him that he needed to do something that he was interested in, rather than something that he felt like he needed to do. I hope I didn't ruin his life. He's coming. He'll be teaching at Franklin College in Franklin, Indiana, this fall. And he comes back to the States. He's in Bangladesh right now. He comes back to the States at the end of July. So we'll see what's going on. I'll keep you posted. Asian Canadians seem less interested in the idea of doing things for the sake of anticipated positive feelings compared with the European Canadians. Life appears to be less about a pursuit of happiness for people with Asian cultural experiences than it does for Westerners. And of course, this was the problem with my student from Bangladesh. He felt guilty for wanting to study something that he was interested in. European Canadians report experiencing many positive emotions and less depression. East Asians who report having many positive emotions are no less at risk for depression than those East Asians who report having very few positive emotions. And this is according to Liu et al. In 2011. Positive feelings do not seem to carry the same protection against depression in East Asia. Grossman and Cross in 2010 investigated Russian and American personalities through vignettes and discovered that Russians were more likely to identify with the stereotype of the Russian brooder than were Americans. They brood, as you can hear, he's brooding, she's brooding. These are Russians, he's brooding. Reflective Americans were more prone to depression, but Russian brooders tended toward less depression because they think so much. Brooding over negative emotions, while common in Russia, does not lead to Russians feeling depressed as it does for Americans. And if you ever read Russian literature, it's all about the brooding. Tsai and colleagues in 2006 proposed the notion of ideal effect, the kinds of feelings that people desire. They are the emotions that people are trying to achieve, so they structure their lives in order to increase the likelihood that they will experience these emotions. For most Americans, ideal effect contains positive emotions that are high in arousal, whereas for most East Asians, ideal effect contains positive emotions that are low in arousal. Tsai et al. In 2006 looked at children's storybooks and found that American storybooks showed faces that were excited and had big smiles than the storybooks for children in Taiwan. And these are children from Taiwan. The researchers discovered that European American preschool children preferred pictures of excited faces more than the Taiwanese preschoolers did. And they also felt more similar to the characters they were engaged in high arousal activities. The Taiwanese children felt more similar to the characters engaged in low arousal activities, like meditation. Looking at the Gospels of the Bible and Buddhist texts, Miao and Sepla in 2007 found that high arousal states were encouraged more in the Christian texts, whereas low arousal states were encouraged more in Buddhist texts. And of course, these are all Christians, and there's Buddha right there in the middle. Some Christian sects include enthusiastic religious practices such as jumping, shouting, and applause, and sometimes rattlesnake handling. This is a group that he's got one too. And there's one, oh, I guess not. Buddhist religious practices emphasize meditation and the calming of one's mind. This is weird. European Americans are more likely to engage in active individual activities such as jogging and rollerblading, whereas Asian Americans are more likely to pursue more passive activities such as sightseeing and picnicking. And if you've ever seen Asian tourists, we ran into a lot of Asian tourists when we were vacationing in Hawaii, and all they wanted to do was drive around on buses and take pictures. It was weird. And so, what did we want to do? We wanted to hike up Diamond Head. We wanted to jog around the island. I mean, it was just, we wanted to surf, body surf. You can surf on the North Shore anyway, but you wouldn't see any Asian tourists out there. They were sunbathing, that you could see them sunbathing, not very much, but a little bit. And of course, we were walking out into the ocean. Okay. European Americans are more likely to prefer fast tempo and exciting music, whereas Chinese are more likely to prefer calm music. And this is Quiet Riot. And if you click on this, you'll go to come and hear the noise or whatever it is. Anyway, that's Quiet Riot's song from the 80s, I think. But if I do that, then they'll block me because of the copyright laws. So I won't do that. Among Westerners, interpersonally and disengaging acts feel especially good. You can go back and listen to Quiet Riot if you want. Two of these guys are dead. These two guys have died of drug overdoses. This is the only guy that's still alive, I think, and the drummer. He's the lead singer. Maybe he's the one that's dead, and he's the one. Well, anyway. Among Westerners, interpersonally and disengaging acts feel especially good. Subjective well-being is associated with positive feelings. People operate under the implicit theory that more positive feelings are better. Positive emotions serve as a bulwark against depression, and high arousal positive emotions are preferred. Among East Asians, interpersonally engaging acts feel especially good. Subjective well-being is associated with appropriate role behaviors. People operate under the implicit theory that it is good to experience both positive and negative feelings. Positive emotions are not associated with less depression, and low arousal positive emotions are more sought after. And if you click on this X, you get to listen to the top 10 songs from Japan from about 5 years ago. And that is the end of the lecture. I'll talk to you guys next week about something. What am I talking about next week? Oh, well, whatever I'm talking about, I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun. Psychology is a lot more fun than environmental science and computers and math.